We're on Daf Memches Amid Aleph. We're about a third of the way down. And let's remember that we had a machlokas between Rabbah and Rav Chizda about the principle of Hoil. Whereas Rabbah accepts Hoil, Rav Chizda rejects it. And we started yesterday the sugya of Rabbi Bar Chama. Rabbi Bar Chama, here on the top of Daf Memches Amid Aleph, wants to make a tlut, an interdependence. He wants to suggest that this machlokas between Rav Chizda and Rabbah about whether we accept Hoil is really an older machlokas that dates back to our Mishnah here in Perek Elu Ovrim, the machlokas between Rebby Eliezer and Rebby Yehoshua regarding an Isa Tmeya B'Yontif and Hafrashas Chala. We know that Chala Tmeya is Asura, and therefore if you were to bake Chala Tmeya on Yontif, it would certainly be a malacha of Afiyah, Shalol Tzarech Hayom, and therefore you would involve a Chiyuv Malchus. Rebby Eliezer says that if you have an Isa Tmeya, then what you should do is bake it and then be mafresh chal. The baking itself is considered ochel nefesh because any single part of the dough and any part of the bread could be considered ochel nefesh. Later on, after you have the bread, then you'll be mafresh challah. But at the time of the afiyah, it wasn't a violation of afiyah shalol litzarech because any part of the bread could theoretically be litzarech. Rebby Yehoshua, on the other hand, said that no, you have a problem here of afiyah shalol litzarech because there's no question that one part of what you're baking is challah tmei is asura, and it's shalol litzarech. Therefore, Rebby Yehoshua says, let be well what's well, meaning leave the isa as is without baking it, and if it ferments, you do not violate the isa of Bal Yirah by Matzah because it doesn't belong to you. And now Rabbi Bar Chama says that Rebby Eliezer is based on the principle of Hoil. He's going to allow you to bake these kikros, and later on, after the baking process, you'll be mafresh one of them as challah. He holds like Rabbah that we say Hoil. Therefore, even though later on, at the end of the day, when you're mafresh one of these various kikros as challah, it will become also bachila because it's tmeya, and therefore it turns out that the afiyah of that particular kikar that was designated as challah is shalol tzarech ochel nefesh. Nevertheless, you're allowed to bake them because of hoil. Now, what's the hoil over here? The hoil is that he could have done the following: instead of being mafresh one particular kikar and set it aside as challah, he could have been mafresh a little bit of challah from each one of the smaller kikros. And had he done so, then for sure it would be a meleches ochel nefesh. And the reason for that is because we have a principle called rov, which means that if most of the kikar is edible, it's not challah, then the afiyah is determined by the rov. And it's an afiyah l'tzarech ochel nefesh. Again, the point that we have to emphasize here is that he's actually baking all of the dough together as one piece. He's not breaking it down into smaller kikros and being mafresh challah from each one of the small kikros. He's going to take one particular kikar and designate it as challah. And Rebby Yehoshua is going to argue, well, you're baking a kikar that's challah. We can't allow you to do so. That's a meleches shalol litzorech afiyah that would generate a chiyuv malchus. Whereas Rebby Eliezer, according to Rabbi Bar Chama, is activating the principle of ho'il and saying that what could happen or what he could have done, we're not going to require him to be mafresh from every single little kikar a small piece of challah. That would be too much of a tircha to require of him. But we're going to rely on ho'il, and we're going to say that since he could have been mafresh a smaller amount from each kikar, such that each kikar was subject to an afil etzorech ochel nefesh, that's why it's mutter. Rav Papa comes along now, just to review what we did yesterday, and he disagrees. He says that there's no way that you could pin Rebby Eliezer down to the principle of ho'il. Why? Because Rebby Eliezer's kula in our Mishnah was based on dika idna dika ayal litanura al chad v'chad chazile lididei. Rebby Eliezer stands or falls on the following logic: not the ho'il that he could have done a afrasha from every single kikar. No, Rebby Eliezer is based on the fact that any particular kikar that he puts into the oven and bakes could have been lididei, chazi lididei. You cannot pinpoint any particular kikar and say, well, that's shalol etzochel nefesh, because that kikar is going to be the challah kikar. We don't know that. So we go back to the Shas Afiyah. That's how Rav Papa interprets Rebby Eliezer. And at that moment, the Afiyah of every single kikar can be defined as ochel nefesh. What kikar at the end of the day he will designate as challah, that's a problem, but that's not relevant to the afiyah per se. Masha Enkein, in the case of an ofa miyontif l'chol, at the time of the afiyah, it's already written in stone that it is shalol etzorech ochel nefesh because he's designating it for use tomorrow. He has no use for it today. He finished as soon as yontif. Now Rabbah comes up with a svar of ho'il. Maybe the situation will change, and down the line we'll find someone who will enjoy this loaf on Yontif. And one of his unexpected guests is going to show up. Rebby Eliezer never accepted that. And now we're up to Rav Shisha B'rei Rav Idi. So let's see if we can find the place here on Daf Mem Chesam and Aleph. We're about halfway through the Amud. The first word in the line, if it helps anybody, is Ema. If you can find, just roll your finger up and down the right side of the Gemara, you'll see Ema. And you move towards the left, you see Amar Rav Shisha. Now, let's just emphasize that whereas Rav Chizda was unimpressed and he was not convinced of the tlut, of the interdependence between Rebby Eliezer and Rabbah, accepting the principle of ho'il, Rav Shisha is going to question the interdependence between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rav Chizda. Rav Shisha B'rei Rav Idi. Vidilma lohi, perhaps the machlokas between Rab and Rav Chizda is not dependent upon the machlok between Rebby Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. The adkan lo ka'amar Rabbi Yehoshua hasam the lo amrin and ho'il. Why does Rabbi Yehoshua say that you're not allowed to bake this isa tmei on yontif? And that's because we reject ho'il. Okay, Rabbi Yehoshua rejects ho'il. But under what circumstances? He has one kikar. We don't know which one it is. We can't identify it at this point at the time that he puts the dough into the oven, but ultimately we'll be able to identify that kikar that he singles out as challah, and that kikar will be prohibited both to him and to everyone else, the whole belt. You're going to have to just burn it. That's all you could do with it. Aval hacha, but here, Rabbi Yehoshua, in the case of Ofer Miyontif L'chol, could accept the position of Rabbah, because what he's baking is roy la'orchim. There's somebody on the face of the earth who will definitely want to enjoy the benefit of his breads, the loaves that he's baking. We don't know if that person's going to show up or not, but at least at the time of the afiyah, you could look at the afiyah and say, this is afiyah that could become ochel nefesh if orchim will show up. Masechet, in the case of an isa tmeah, we know that there's at least one kikar that's going to be challah. That's not roy. It's not chazi la'achila for anybody on the face of the earth. We're tempted to introduce, brisket terminology here. That maybe what, Rav Shisha is trying to point out is that challah is a chefta disura. Again, I'm talking about challah tmei, obviously. It's inherent in the, no one could enjoy the benefit of this challah. But when you talk about a ma'isa afiyah, and you want to know whether that ma'isa afiyah is related to ochel nefesh or not, well, I'll prove to you that the afiyah, again, it's the tzarech chol, but the afiyah per se is not generating a chefta disura. He won't eat the kikar that he bakes because he's full to the brim. But the kikar per se, in and of itself, is a chefta de teira. Now the question is it related to yontif in any way? Is it l'tzarech yontif? And the answer is, we'll find somebody on the face of the earth so that this afiyah will be an afiyah l'tzarech yontif, because the afiyah created ochel nefesh. Okay, who needs the ochel nefesh? That's a question. Maybe somebody will need the ochel nefesh as far as this kikar is concerned. But the kikar itself lends itself to ochel nefesh. Masechet came challah tmeah doesn't lend itself to ochel nefesh at all. It's a chefta disura, and the baking thereof is an afiyah of meleches yontiv shalolitzar. According to Rav Shisha, where does Rebby Eliezer fit into the picture? It would seem that according to Rebby Eliezer, we simply don't have that ho'il of archiv. We have the following possibility, that according to Rebby Eliezer, you at the time of the afiyah, we don't have a chefta disur, meaning Rebby Yehoshua looks at the afiyah from a broader perspective in terms of time. Now, halacha requires that within this afiyah, there's got to be one kikar that is a chefta disura. It's challah tmeah. Rebby Eliezer, on the other hand, says, well, if you cannot specify and single out which afiyah, which kikar is a chefta disura, then every single kikar potentially is a kikar sheyesh bo ochel nefesh. So we don't reflect on the afiyah in its totality. We break up the afiyah into its component parts, and every one of those parts could be considered ochel nefesh. Rebby Yehoshua l'shitaso says, no, you are baking something that is a chefta disura. It's lo chazi lo l'didei v'lo l'kuli alma. Is going to be challah tmeah. And the thought just occurred to me, Rabbosai. Again, as I was speaking, I didn't think this out before I came in today. This is one of those days when it's good to have a Zoom share, no matter whether there's a pandemic or not. I don't know, just to go out there in this weather. I don't know how soaking you got on the way back from Shachris like I did. But anyway, but what I wanted to suggest, it just occurred to me, the thought that what is challah? That's an interesting question. For example, in Truma, we have stage number one before the afrosha, that's called tevel. And in challah, likewise, we have tevel l'challah. From that perspective, challah is truma. Reishis harisosechem tarimu, right? The word truma in challah. So challah is to an isa what truma is to grains. If that be the case, then maybe we could shed a whole other light here on Rav Shisha's understanding of Rebby Yehoshua. My problem is going to be how to understand the counter argument for Rebby Eliezer, but let's focus on Rebby Yehoshua. Rebby Yehoshua is saying, yeah, very good. At this point, any single kikar, any single part of the afiyah could theoretically, potentially be tzarech ochel nefesh. He hasn't yet designated as challah. Says Rabbi Yehoshua, but it's tevel. It's tevel l'chal. So that the entire proposition that this baking is l'tzorech ochel nefesh is based on the fact that you are going to remove the isa tevel. So the hafrashas challah is inherent in the afiyah itself, because otherwise, paradoxically, this could not be an afiyah l'tzorech ochel nefesh, it's an afiyah of tevel. If in the present state, which I'm postponing the hafrasha, I have an isa shechayeves b'challah, I'm just postponing the actual hafrasha, then what I have in front of me is tevel. So how are you going to convert this afiyah into an ochel nefesh? Can you classify it as an ochel nefesh? The answer is yes. Why? Because I'm going to be mafresh challah. Oh, the hafrashas challah of tomorrow or an hour from now is what makes this afiyah into an afiyah ochel nefesh. But you're baking the challah as well. So vis-a-vis the challah, which is challah tmeah, you have no heter ochel nefesh. In a sense, I'm convincing myself now that Rabbi Yehoshua is more logical than Rebby Eliezer. Let's see if I can go back to Rebby Eliezer and make some sense out of it. Again, why is this a ochel nefesh? Because I don't know where the challah is going to be, so that any piece of the kikar that I put into the oven is potentially ochel nefesh. It's tevel. How can you call it ochel nefesh? Nobody can eat tevel, not a Kohen, not a Yisrael. The answer is I'm going to be mafresh. In other words, I need a matir, but once I have that matir, then I go back to the afiyah, and I could say the afiyah was an afiyah shel heter, meaning it was l'tzorech ochel nefesh. Well, you know what? Maybe I'm just thinking. Maybe you could say something else. Maybe Rebby Eliezer says that ochel nefesh is in the mind, meaning I don't have to look at the chefza per se. Like I'll give you an example. What would you say about a malacha on yayin? I don't know what malacha. Let's say meshamer or meraked. He has to take out the sediments from the wine. What would you say about a malacha of meraked on yayin for a nazir? And possibly you could say, we had a whole sugya, if you remember, an erevin about whether a yayin could be used as an erev tchumen on behalf of nazir. And one of the svaras the Gemara said there was the ibayim mitchell, that the nazir could always be shoel in front of a chacham on his nazirus. So again, I'm making a few jumps over here, but just for l'saber to ozen, as we say. Let's call she'ela a matir. Again, I know you'll fight me on that, but I'm just using it as an illustration. What would be the case of a meleches ochel nefesh on a chefza d'isura that has a matir to it? One perspective, which I think would be Rabbi Yehoshua's perspective, is that you can't call that a meleches ochel nefesh. Who are you fooling? It's a chefza d'isura. Another perspective would say, well, I have a matir. Down the line, I'm going to be matir. And ochel nefesh is now in the mind, so to speak. Again, but tonight that I could be matir. Obviously, I need the halachic, permission to go ahead and remove that isa. It's not just a figment of my imagination. I'm not just lying through my teeth. Hamavashal gid anosh. I can't just say, well, I'm going to eat gid anosh. I love gid anosh. That makes it into an ochel nefesh. No. It's got to be halachic permission to eat that tavshil to make it into ochel nefesh. But that halachic permission is a side condition. The real thrust of the heter here of meleches ochel nefesh is my intention. I am baking this for purpose of today. On Yom Tov, I will eat this. It's tevel. No problem. I'll be mafresh challah. So that Rebby Eliezer's perspective might be that to get ochel nefesh, I'm not bothered by the chefza d'isura. The chefza d'isura only makes it impossible for it to be an ochel nefesh. If it is possible that despite the fact that now it's a chefza d'isura, but I can apply a matir and remove that isur, then it becomes ochel nefesh, because that's my intention. Rabbi Yehoshua says no. What am I looking at now? I am looking at now an afia, which must by definition have a hafrashas challah. Otherwise, it can't possibly be an ochel nefesh afia. Well, my friend, if you're looking at hafrashas challah and you're telling me that within this isa, X percentage, which that's going to be the next figure, what percentage you have to give for challah, but X percentage is going to be given as challah. Well, it's challah tmeya. There's no way you can call that ochel nefesh. And again, you'll ask Rebby Yehoshua, but wait a minute, I didn't specify which part. And let me be naive. Every single part of this dough that I put into the oven could potentially be ochel nefesh. You can't point and say, well, there's the afiyah shalol tzarech ochel nefesh. Rebby Yehoshua is going to answer, but wait a minute, it's teva. Right now, as things basher sham, it's a chefta disura. There's no ochel nefesh over here. Oh, you're an ibachacham. You're going to be mafresh challah. Well, if you're going to be mafresh challah, then you're pointing to the inherent challah in the isa, and that's not ochel nefesh because that's challah tmeya. Can't be eaten by anybody. In any event, just to summarize the sugya up until now, we have Rami Bar Chama on the one hand, and we have Rav Papa ganging up together with Rav Shisha on the other hand, both ganging up against Rami Bar Chama, but from two different angles. Rav Papa is going to argue against Rami Bar Chama in the logic that connects Rebby Eliezer with the svara of Hoil, as if to say that Rebby Eliezer, who came before Rabbah, but was standing on the shoulders of Rabbah, meaning on his logic of Hoil. And Rebby Eliezer's leniency is because of Hoil. Once he had Hoil, in the case of Ofer Miyotif L'chol, then he extended it and applied it to the case of Hafrosh of the Isa Tmeya on Yotam, baking Isa Tmeya. Amzul Rav Papa says that's totally ridiculous. What does one thing have to do with the other? In this case of Afias Isa Tmeya, from Rabbi Eliezer's perspective, the Isa is Chazi, it's Royal Achila for everybody. There's no challah tmeya here. You're talking about a case of an afiyah l'tzarech chol, because maybe the archim will come, and if it's chazi li'archim, that Rabbi Eliezer never suggested he would even go that far. But Shisha comes along and he says, "You're accusing Rabbi Yehoshua of rejecting Hoil. What are you talking about? Rabbi Yehoshua is based on the fact that there's challah here in this Isa. True, you haven't been mafresh it yet, but there's challah here. Challah tmeya is eina ra'uya l'kuli alma. Nobody can eat challah tmeya. In the case where he's preparing something, a very fine loaf of bread, a delicacy that it looks good, it smells good, it's real ochel nefesh. We just need someone to eat it. Oh, that's a different kind of a holy. But don't tell me that Rabbi Yehoshua is going to reject Hoil. He doesn't reject Hoil. Hoil's a very nice svara. Once I could say that the hefzer that he's cooking, that he's baking, is roy, Rabbi Yehoshua is on board. He can certainly adopt the position of Rav. But when you're telling me that he's baking challah tmeya, and again, Rabbi Yehoshua is not interested in hearing, well, he hasn't yet been mafresh, that's a hefzer disur for everybody. So chazi lo v'lo l'kuli alma. Aval hacha de chazi mi aliachim ema hachinami amrin and ho. Now the next part of the sugya, the Gemara wants to defend Rami Bar Chama. And Amru Rabbanan Kami Rabbi Yirmiyah v'Rabbi Zera. They told over Rami Bar Chama shtickle Torah that there's an interdependence between the machlokas of Rabbah and Rav Chizda and Ofer Miyotiv L'chol and the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua in our Mishnah. And this was presented in front of two of the great Amoraim in the next generation after Rami Bar Chama, and they had two different reactions. Rabbi Yirmiyah Kibla, Rabbi Zera Lo Kibla. Now it's really amazing that that the Gemara is not going to be so happy here with Rabbi Zera. What do you mean low kibla? I mean, you're talking about Rami Bar Chama over here. You know, don't be so quick to reject Rami Bar Chama. So Rabbi Yirmiyah turns to Rabbi Zera and he says, Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera milsa de kashalon v'asio kama shani b'mai pligi Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yehoshua. For years, we've been schwitzing it out. We've been sweating out this sugya of Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yehoshua. We couldn't crack it. We couldn't figure out what are they arguing about. One says, yeah, go ahead and bake this Isa Tmeya. And the other says, no, don't you dare bake it, let it rise, and there's no Bal Yerobah Matzeh. What lies at the root of the machlokas? And this is something that has preoccupied our minds for years. You know, certain people go to sleep at night, and they worry about the stocks and the bonds, and of course the epidemic, right? But other people are sitting there trying to figure out what's the Yesod HaMachlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. And now, Hashta, who came to the scene, it was none other than the great Rami Bar Chama, Ruah Mishmei de Gabra Rabba. We now have a new insight to explain this machlokes, in which Rami Bar Chama claims that this is an old, not an old machlokes, but another machlokes about Hoil. Velone Kablo, we should be jumping for joy. We finally have a Gavra Rabbah who revealed the secret that we've been seeking to reveal for all these years. And you, Machmit Ahad, you know, you just reject it outright. Now, Rabosai, I just want to interject here one point. I don't understand why Rabbi Yirmiyah was disturbed for years about this machlokas. I'm going to offer a couple of possibilities, all of which seem quite attractive, quite logical. I don't know why he lost sleep over this. One machlokas might be as to whether or not there's Bal Yerobah Matzeh on the schus that the mafresh, the Baal Bayis, has to choose the Kohen of his choice, which is a fundamental machlokas in Masechet Mitzvah called Tovas Hana. It's also in Masechet Kiddushin, Tovas Hana Mamon or Lav Mamon. Do I have ownership over this challah? So Rabbi Yehoshua says, that it's not mine. There's no Bal Yerobah Matzeh over here. Rabbi Eliezer counter argues and he says, but you have rights to choose which Kohen will benefit from your Hafrashas Challah. Who will be the recipient? You're the donor and you're in the driver's seat. You can earmark your donation to that Kohen. Rabbi Yehoshua says that Tovas Hana, Lav Mamon, that's not real inherent value. You know, to say I own something in this challah, Rabbi Yehoshua is not willing to accept. Alternatively, maybe the machlokas is about Moven Shevet. As long as I haven't specified one particular Kohen, then all of Shevet Kahuna has a partnership in this challah. And therefore, it's not included on the Bal Yerobah Matzeh. So Rabbi Yehoshua says, let it be. But apparently, Rabbi Yirmiyah was not happy with this. I'll tell you why. Because all those explanations are really post facto, so to speak. They really don't address the fundamental issue. You want to talk about why Rabbi Eliezer needs to bake the dough, and you want to talk about Rabbi Yehoshua, who's laid back about it, and he says, what are you rushing? What's the urgency to bake the dough? Let it rise. and there's no Bal Yerah Bal Yemotzi. There is Bal Yerah Bal Yemotzi, says Rebby Eliezer. You want to talk about that? That's wonderful. But that's not going to calm me down. Because I have a more fundamental machlokus here between Rebby Eliezer and Rebby Yehoshua that remains unexplained. And that is, am I allowed to bake the the dough, the Isa Tmei on Yontif? Is it Meleches Ochel Nefesh? And Rebby Eliezer is going to say that you're allowed to bake the bread. And Rebby Yehoshua is going to say you can get Malchus for baking the bread. Here, all your svaras about Mammon Cohen and whether or not Tovas Hana to choose you or the Cohen of your choice is Mammon or it's not Mammon, irrelevant. That would be relevant if you wanted to know, excuse me, why Rebby Eliezer objects to let bygones be bygones. You know, let the dough rise. I want to know something else. Why does Rebby Yehoshua object to baking the dough? You're going to tell me it's Challah Tmeya? There's no Challah Tmeya here. Anybody whisper anything here about Challah Tmeya? I'm looking at the dough. I don't see any Challah Tmeya here. Rebby Eliezer is 100% right. He hasn't been mafresh Challah Tmeya. So at the time of the Afiyah, there is no Challah Tmeya. Oh, now we invite Rami Bar Chama into the ring. Give him the microphone. Here's a Gavar Rabba who has something a light to shed on this machlokas. And that is, it depends upon Hoth. Could he have done a hafrosha which would circumvent the problem of shalol l'tzarech ochel nefesh? Rebby Yehoshua says, no way, no how. He is going to be mafresh one kika as challah. It's unavoidable that challah is a chefzer d'isura for the ganze Welt. And it cannot be ochel nefesh. The afiyah is an afiyah asura. Come to Lord Rebby Eliezer, and he says, "Nein, you're making a mistake, Rebby Yehoshua. I can allow him to bake this Isa Tmeya because of Ho'il. Ho'il tells me that I could have baked it and then be mafresh chal in a way that even you, Rebby Yehoshua, would have to agree that there was 100% ochel nefesh here. He's going to pinch off a little challah from every single kikar." So Rebby Yehoshua says, wait a minute, is that what he's doing? Oh no, that's not what he's doing. You want to require him, after the afiyah of many kikros, to take a little pinch of challah from each one of these small kikros? I'm on board with you. That's okay. But you're not requiring him that. You're telling him to take the Isa as is and put it into the oven, and then you're going to separate challah. And that part of the challah had an afiyah. Let's say he does many kikros, and he takes one kikar and he designates its challah. That afiyah on that particular kikar is an afiyah shalol l'tzarech. It's challah tmeya. Because he's going to be mafresh one kikar as challah. You're telling me, Rebby Eliezer, but he could have avoided it. And he could have been mafresh a small part from each one of the different kikros. And then we'd apply the principle of rov so that each afiyah of every single kikar is l'tzarech ochel nefesh. Wonderful, but that's not what he did. You're talking about something potential. Says Rabbi Bar Chama, that's the machlok shin Rabbah and Rav Chizda about meleches ochel nefesh. When do we consider it meleches ochel nefesh? Rav Chizda wants tachlis. Tachlis, are you baking this loaf of bread because you're going to eat it on Yontif? You're baking it for tomorrow. Let's call a spade a spade. Comes along Rabbah and he says, but he could have archim, and we're going to bridge the gap, says Rabbah, between the actual, the real, and the potential through the principle of Ho'il. Of Yehoshua. Now, let's figure out where you stand, and for that matter, Rebby Eliezer as well, on this machlokas. Does Ho'il allow me to bridge between reality now and potential? If you accept Rabba's principle of Hoil, then apply it as Rebby Eliezer does to the question of the afiyah of Isa Tmeya. If you apply Hoil, the answer is that he could have potentially been mafresh a little pinch of challah from each one of the kikros. And that's exactly what Rabbi was saying, that potentially there might be an ochel nefesh because Archim might show up. Rebby Yehoshua Lishitaso is predicated on Rav Chisda. We don't look at the potential. There's no Hoil that could bridge between the real and the actual and the potential. Right now, ask the man, in all honesty, why he's baking this challah when it's, Erev Shabbos and he's eaten all his Sudas Yontif, and he'll admit to you he's baking it for tomorrow, for Shabbos or for Chol. That's the real. Ask me now what he's going to be mafresh for challah with this Isa Tmei after it's baked. Says Rebby Yehoshua, the man tells you, and that's what the halacha tells you, that he's going to be mafresh one kikar out of the 50 kikros as challah. Well, there was no ochel nefesh in that kikar because it's challah tmeya. And it's only Rebby Eliezer who looks through the eyes and the perspective of Hoil to create a potential and make it and actualize a potential which is not real. No archim around. I took out my binoculars or my telescope and I looked in every single direction. There are no archim. The only archim that might show up are the three Arabs of, Malachi Hashores of Avraham. But right now, I'm not sure that any Malachim are going to show up. Is Rebby Yehoshua, Tachlis, Ofem Yontif L'chol is Ofem Yontif L'chol, and Afiyas Chala is Afiyas Chala, it's Chal Tmeya, it's not Ochel Nefesh. So why, Rabbi Zera, are you fighting City Hall when we finally can dig our teeth into a good solid piece of Chala Tahora, of a good explanation for the machlokas between Rebby Eliezer and Rebby Yehoshua? Amalei, so Rabbi Zera says, "Hey, how can I possibly accept the explanation of this Gavra Rabbah? The Tanina, what are you going to do with the following price?" Amalei Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua turns to Rebby Eliezer and he says, "Lidvarecha, that you're allowing baking on Yontif all these kikros, even though he's going to be mafresh one of them as challah. Hareyu over mishum lo saseh kol malacha." As far as that one kikar that's going to be challah, he has an afiyah which is shalol tzarich ochel nefesh. V'shasik le. And Rebby Eliezer had no answer. In other words, shtika kodada. Rebby Eliezer himself admitted defeat. Apparently, he did not accept Hoil. V'im Isa, according to Rabbi Bar Chama, that Rebby Eliezer accepted Hoil, Lemale, why didn't he yell and scream to Rebby Yehoshua? I'm a didim from Hoil. Did Rebby Eliezer forget the principle of Hoil? And Rabbi Bar Chama is saying that just like Rabbah allows you to bake on Yontif for Chol because of Hoil, so too, says Rabbi Bar Chama, Rebby Eliezer allows you to bake that which will become challah because you could have avoided it Hoil and you could have been mafresh a little piece from each one of the kikros. Why was Rebby Eliezer so silent? Why was he tongue-tied? Would he have a tinus dibur? I mean, this is a machlokas tanoim, and Rabbi Yehoshua is accusing Rabbi Eliezer of permitting an afiyah on Yontif Shelo L'Tzorech, which is a violation of Kol Malacha Lo Sasu, Lo Tasa Kol Malacha. And Rabbi Eliezer takes it sitting down? What happened to Hoil? Well, what is Rabbi Bar Chama is smarter than Rabbi Eliezer? After all, Rabbi Bar Chama is only coming to explain Rabbi Eliezer. Amalei, Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zera, uletamech. What are you going to do with the following brisa? You're telling me that the fact that Rebby Eliezer said nothing meant that he conceded the truth, that he rescinded his position. What are you going to say about the following brisa? Hatnina bebrisa, we have another brisa. Amalo Rebby Eliezer lidvarecha. Rebby Eliezer turns to Rebby Yehoshua. He says, according to you, that mafresh chala mina isa, and if he does so, he cannot bake it. So therefore, he should not be mafresh chala mina isa. And of course, if he were to bake it, it would be a violation of Meleches Hafiyah, Shelo Litzorach. So therefore, says Rebby Yehoshua, let bygones be bygones and let the dough rise. What do you mean, let the dough rise? Rebby Eliezer turns to Rebby Yehoshua and he says, Areyu over Mishum Bal Yirah Bal Yimotzei. Iki'ilu, Rebby Yehoshua, your alternative is better than mine? You advocate that we leave the dough in its present state and let it rise? And at least Ben Bava said, put it into cold water. Shasically. Rebby Yehoshua didn't say a word. Is Hachanami to Lo Ahader? Here also, what are you going to tell me? That he had no answer in his back pocket? You know, the very fact that he would show say, you prove from the brisa that Rebby Eliezer didn't respond to Rebby Yehoshua's argument. There must be that Rebby Eliezer had nothing to say. So I'm going to tell you that Rebby Yehoshua had nothing to say back to Rebby Eliezer about Bal Yirah Bal Yimotzei. Read the Mishnah, my friend. Rabbi Zera, I love you. But did you not read the Mishnah? Tisnan, Komahada Leiv Maslisa Tisnan, Lo Zeu Chamishim was Horan Old Mishum Bal Yirah Bal Yimotzei. This is not Bal Yirah Bal Yimotzei. This belongs to Shevet Kahuna. The Torah says, Lo Yirah L'Chacham Esav L'Torah Shel Acherim. This is Shchavit Shel Acherim. Why didn't Rabbi Yehoshua, what again, was it Tainus Dibur? What do you have, something in his tongue? He burnt his tongue on the hot tea this morning? Well, what is Rabbi Yehoshua? Ella, I'm sorry, my friend Rabbi Zera, you have no choice. But you're going to have to assume Shasik Lebe Braisu, Mahado Lebe Maslisa. Rabbi Yehoshua felt, in that particular occasion, you know, wherever they were discussing it, and it was recorded in a brisa, that he doesn't have to respond to defend himself. To him, it was so clear that there's no Bal Yirah Bal Yimotzei here that he didn't even bother answering it. But the Mishnah records exactly what Rabbi Yehoshua held. Again, here we don't have a Mishnah. The Mishnah does not record Rebby Eliezer's counter-argument against Rabbi Yehoshua, but there's a Mechil Tachrita. You know, go out and find the brisa. I'm sure you'll find a brisa where Rebby Eliezer defends himself and quotes and invokes the halacha, the principle of hope. And this, my friends, the next piece of line or two in the Gemara is only la halacha. How do we paskin in this machlokas? But right now, we've really come to the Talmudic end of this whole long sugya that we've been studying. And it's really fascinating in terms of Rami Bar Chama and whether or not Rebby Eliezer is based on Hoil and Rebby Yehoshua rejects Hoil, and the whole machlokas here is identical with the machlokas of Rabbah and Rav Chizda about Ofem Yontif L'chol. It's amazing to me how you line up the sheetas over here. You know, Rabbi Bar Chama was convinced that he finally revealed the secret, the deep, dark secret of what this machlokas Rebbe Eliezer and Rebbe Yehoshua is all about. And on the other hand, you have Rav Papa, who rejects the equation in terms of Rebby Eliezer. You have Rav Shisha, who rejects the equation in terms of Rebby Yehoshua. And then you have Rav Zera, who has a brisa in which Rebby Eliezer was shosei, and he didn't invoke the principle of Hoil. It means that Rebby Eliezer did not accept Hoil. And then you have Rabbi Yirmiyah to defend the Gavra Rabbah, Rami Bar Chama, and assume that that is the machlokas. Rabbi Eliezer accepted Hoil, Rabbi Yehoshua rejected Hoil, and the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua is identical with the Machlokes Rabbah and Rav Chizda of Ofer Miyontif L'chol. But what is it? I mean, I walk away from this sugya with a certain emptiness, almost annoying question here. It gnaws at me. The G. I don't understand. So he was shosek, he wasn't shosek. There's another milsach. What does he call it? A milchil tachriti. You'll find another brisa. I'm sure if you look from here till the end of the world, you'll discover a brisa in which Rebby Eliezer will defend himself based on ho'il. I don't know. Honestly, I am inclined towards Rav Papa and Rav Shisha, because I see clear demarcations between the two issues, the two machlokot, the two controversies. And, I get the feeling, again, it's just a hargoshas halev, that Rav Yirmi was sort of like desperate almost. He couldn't come up with a halachic principle that would give him a plugta, a yesod ha-plugta. Rav Soloveitchik used to always ask us, what's the yesod of the machlokas? He used to train us, right? Rav Yirmi was trained in that derech. He couldn't live, with this ambiguity, with this dark secret that we don't know what they're arguing about. What are they debating about? And when he heard from, the Shmuah of Rabbi Bar Chava, he got very, very excited. But when you analyze Rabbi Bar Chava's logic, and I would, by the way, I would submit to you that this is almost always the case. The tlut philosophy, to use a Hebrew word, this interdependence is always very, very tricky. Whenever you set up an analogy between one issue and another issue, you're setting yourself up for trouble. You're like a board, that they're going to shoot. They're going to be shooting target. You're a target. For the arrows. They're going to make chilukim and distinctions. I just want to show you a Gemara here in the 5th parak on Daf Samach Beis. Because I use Masechet, I have to get up and get another Gemara because it's in a different volume. They have 6 volumes on Pesachim. So the Gemara here on Daf Samach Beis, again, I'm not going to give you a whole shir on this now because you'll have to come to my 10:45 shir for that. But just to give you a little bit of a tip of the iceberg, the Gemara has a machlokes as to how to define an orel vis-a-vis Korban Pesach. Is he considered a bar kapara or is he not considered a bar kapara? And the Gemara says that since an orel could circumcise himself, theoretically, even though now he's an orel, he's considered a bar kapara. And believe it or not, that actually generates a psul in the Korban Pesach when the Kohen had a machshava l'shem arelim, because the halacha of shinui bailim in machshava poselis and Korban has to be dumya de chavera. And one man the Omer in the Gemara says dumya de chavera. Why? Because he could potentially circumcise himself. The other man the Omer says no. Right now, he's an orel, and an orel is completely excluded from kol orel lo yochabo from the Korban Pesach, which is good news because then it's not a psul of machshava shini bailim, because shini bailim requires dumya de bailim, that he could have been a baal korban. We don't have to get into all the kudshim nuances. My punchline is the Gemara says that issue of how to define an orel depends upon the machlokas between Rabbah and Rav Chizda about ofem miyontif l'chol. If you accept Rabbah's position of ho'il, then an orel is considered a bar kapara because ho'il, theoretically, he could circumcise himself. But if you reject ho'il, like Rav Chizda does in ofem miyontif l'chol, then you look at the reality as is, and he's an Orel. And as an Orel, he's not a Bar Kapara. He's completely excluded from the Korban Pesach. And I when I learned this Gemara on Samach Aleph, Samach Beis, I came to the conclusion that if somebody would have suggested this in Rav Salvatius's class, he would have gotten what we call here in Israel a shpachtel. He would have gotten it over the head. It's like vitamin Pulitzers over here. Rabbah comes along with a svara of maybe Orchim will show up, and therefore it's Ochel Nefesh. And Rav Chisda says right now there are no Orchim. He has no intention. He's baking it for tomorrow. And you're telling me that that's going to determine whatever position you take, either that of Rabbah, Hoil Mekali Orchim, or that of Rav Chisda rejects Hoil, determine what the status of an Orel is. My high. Orel, you want to know what an Orel is? Is a Psul Gavra? He's excluded from Kaparas HaKorban. Is he not? That's a very fine Chakira. And now you're going to talk to me about Orchim on Yontif? Like, do me a favor. Slachli. It's apples and oranges. Start making comparisons. But our Gemara, and if you want to say, I'm not saying this is so, that the final word here is that of Rabbi Yirmiyah, that we have to accept the Gavra Rabba Rabbi Bar Chama, the Gemara is actually accepting this tlut. And the issue of baking and could he have avoided challah and this and so forth and so on. I would say to you that the Gemara over there on Samach Beis is even more difficult, more challenging than this sugya. This sugya, at least we're locally entrenched in defining Meleches Yontif. Is it Ochel Nefesh or is it not? And Rebby Eliezer says the way that Rabbi Bar Chama presents is potentially it could be Ochel Nefesh. And Rabbah, in the case of Ofer Yontif L'chol, wants to define that Afiyah as Ochel Nefesh because potentially it could be Ochel Nefesh. Okay. That much of Rabbi Bar Chama, the Gavra Rabbah, I could accept. The Gemara on Samach Beis, that's a doozy. You want to decide whether an Orel is a Bar Kapar in the Korban Pesach, and that depends on Rabbah and Rav Chisda defining Ochel Nefesh on Yontif. I'm not convinced. Halacha l'maisa, the Gemara gives almost like a postscript here. Nirsha Betzido, Tanya, Rebbe Omer halacha Rebby Eliezer, and Rabbi Yitzchak Omar halacha keben b'seir. Now, this is interesting because we're going back to Tanoim. One Tana, which is no less of a great than Rebbe, he paskins like Rebby Eliezer. So right now I would say stop. What do you mean? Rav Chisda said lo amrin in Hoil. Rebbe paskins like Rebby Eliezer, and Rabbi Bar Chama says it's Tzaba Atalia. So I'm just wondering, if Rav Chisda was here, alive and well, I would say to him, Rav Chisda, are you crossing swords with Rebbe? So maybe Rav Chisda would say, but Rabbi Yitzchak disagrees with Rebbe, and he holds halacha keben b'seira. Yeah, but wait a second. What do you mean halacha keben b'seira? Ben B'seira says that I could freeze the whole process, and the whole discussion here is theoretical. Just take the dough and put it into frozen water, into cold water, and leave well enough alone. It's not going to become chametz. Rabbi Yitzchak accepted the science of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, Ben B'seira. Now you want to argue, no. You know what? It's not too good. It's not a good idea. Tell him to put it into my sonanim. Maybe he won't do it. It'll take too much time. In the meantime, it fermented. It became chametz. Fine. You don't want to rely on Ben B'seira. Okay, that's fine. But Ben B'seira never rejected Rabbi Eliezer. If Ben B'seira was stuck with a dough and there was no water to be had, or no mayim sonanim with the right degree of temperature, then even Ben B'seira would allow you to bake the bread. I don't know that Ben Beseira rejected that. So at the end of the day, even Ben Beseira accepted the principle of Holy. And in my mind, that puts Rav Chizda in a very bad light. Because Rav Chizda, who's one of the greatest Amoraim, and the Gemara tells us how Rabbah was always afraid of Rav Chizda, but nevertheless, he can't argue against the Tanoim. Again, my question is predicated on Rami Bar Chama. I don't get it. Just by way of introduction to the next sugya, on the bottom here of Memches Amud Aleph, Kama Shir Isa. We know that if you continuously knead the dough, that's called his askus be'isa, it's not going to become chametz. But we also know that if you have a very large dough with a lot of kemach in it, it's going to be very difficult to continuously knead the dough in such a way that every single segment of this gigantic dough is prevented from chimutz. So again, if you're going to bake it immediately, it becomes matzah. But it's going to take you a while till the oven is hot and so forth and so on. We're really getting into very dangerous territory. So let's guarantee that he or she can continue to work the dough because it's a very small dough. Kama shir isa. How large of a dough are we going to allow you to continuously knead until you finally put it into the oven and consider it as matzah? And we're not afraid that you'll leave it and it's too much of a dough and part of the dough will become chametz. Now, in the science of it, I don't understand. The Gemara has a very difficult. I wish my Rebbe would help me on this Gemara, because my Rebbe never liked a scientific machlokas. But it seems that there's a scientific machlokas in this Gemara about the nature or the difference, shall we say, between chitim and sior. Wheat and barley, which one of the two has a faster, a more sped up process of chimutz? So we start with Rabbi Shmuel beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, bechita kabayim, b'siorin shlosha kab. Meaning that barley takes a lot longer to rise, and therefore I'm going to be more lenient and I'm going to allow you, in the case of barley, to take as much as 3 kabim. And you'll be able to knead it and continuously as askus so that you prevent it from. But chitim, they rise very quickly, and therefore make sure you have a very small dough. It's only 2 kabim. The Gemara says, "V'atanya Rabbi Shmuel beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer bechitim shloshes kabim ubesiorin arba kabim." Again, the basic principle is the same. That siorim is a slower, more retarded process of fermentation, if I can use that word. But what is it? Is it shnei kavim versus shlosha kavim, or is it shlosha kavim versus arba kavim? Lo kasha, says the Gemara. Ha b'chasichasa, ha b'malyasa. There are different qualities of chitin and siorim. There, it's like Parshas Miketz. You got the paros ros and the paros. What does it say there? Shmenos, whatever the word is, I forgot. Also, you have chitin that come from a certain area, and they're weak, and they don't ferment. And others will ferment its malyusa. They're much better quality. So that's going to determine how much kemach we allow her to continuously knead. Amar Rav Papa, Shmamina, Garine, okay, this is a mathematical issue. Now, we don't have time for this, but tomorrow we're going to see that the Gemara is going to come to the exact opposite conclusion according to other Tanoim, and that Pugfaket, that Siorim, will only going to allow you a lesser amount because they ferment quicker than Chitim. So we need a lot of guidance here to figure out, if Rabbi Yirmiyah couldn't fall asleep at night because he was trying to figure out what's the machlokas. I don't know how you sleep at night and figure out the machlokas, which has a quicker fermentation. Is it siorin or it's chitin? I mean, even within chitin, you have better chitin and less quality. And that's the truth for siorin as well. But if all things are equal, let's say if we're talking about maliyasa, then one mandiyama is going to allow you more siorin and less chitim, and the other mandiyama, as we'll soon see tomorrow, is going to allow you just the opposite, more chitim and less siorin, because siorin have a sped up process of fermentation. I don't know. I do remember my youth, we were studying at that time with Rebby Levi Halpern. Does his name ring anything to you? Ring a bell? Anyway, he was heavy into kashrus and scientific laboratory tests and all this. So we asked him about chimutz. And he made a statement, if I remember correctly, again, don't quote me on this, that we don't know what chimutz is. We're not sure exactly whether fermentation in halach is the same as a a definition of the chemist or the physics. It might not be, So. All right, Rabbosai. So let me take this opportunity to wish everyone not only a great Hanukkah but also a happy Chodesh. And thank you so much.